At what point does a man end and a legend begin? What kind of power must one have that decades after he's gone, thousands of people still remember a single event in a single day of one man's life? Jim Morrison, artist, songwriter, poet, filmmaker, gone in 1971 at only 27 years of age. In his story, Dawn's Highway, Morrison captures a memory of his childhood, a memory recorded in 1969 and made part of the 1978 record An American Prayer, released 7 years after his death. A memory that even today captures our imaginations. Jim Morrison declared, "Indians scattered on Dawn's highway bleeding, ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind." Memory or myth? Fact or creation? Perhaps all the above. How does a young child perceive the concept of death? And what is carried forward into the adult? Jim Morrison asked, "Is death beautiful, or is it nowhere?" That is what I want to know. I mean, is it where it's at, or is it not where it's at?
If you really trace the labor and the migration between the various villages of Española, Chimayo, and those areas, including the Indian Pueblo, Santa Clara, San Ildefonso, there are many workers that are traveling back and forth between Los Alamos, both Native American and Hispanic communities. So already in the 1940s, the Española Valley has begun to be restructured. And so with the development of the labs in Los Alamos, that was part of that restructuring. It provided a base for work for a lot of different individuals.
I had a truck that my dad had the truck, and I was driving it, but it was his business. It was a 1941 pickup, Chevrolet pickup. It wasn't a pickup, it was state body. And we built a plywood cabin in the back, and we built sort of like a bench around it, passengers to sit on. And I don't think I would ride one of those now, but at the time, the people wanted to go to work, and it was cheap. Most of the people that went with me lived in what we call here in San Pedro, Upper San Pedro and Lower San Pedro. So you would go around the loop and pick up the passengers at their homes. And around, usually we had to be up in Los Alamos by 8 o'clock, and I would pick them starting at 7. We'd take off about 20 after 7 or 15 after 7.
And there would have probably been a lot of people on those roads all hours of the day and night because of the intensity of building nuclear weapons during that period.
The road back then, they had a lot of dips, and it was a two-lane highway, maybe 16 feet wide, maybe.
The conditions of roads in New Mexico after World War II were generally very poor, and accidents often assume cataclysmic dimensions.
The growing Morrison family lives in Albuquerque and departs early to explore New Mexico. Jim Morrison remembers being in a car with his parents and grandparents driving through the desert at dawn.
Probably before they came, they would have written to the Bureau of Tourism within the State Highway Department and asked for a map of the state, and they would have been sent brochures that encouraged them to visit the pueblos around Santa Fe, the dances that took place there, the the interesting geography and geology of the area, that all of these things were lures to any motorist who would be traveling in the vicinity of Santa Fe. And going over across the Rio Grande at San Ildefonso Pueblo, and then heading north up toward Española on the west bank through Santa Clara would have been an ideal way of not having to come and go the same way.
He made sure we were all quiet at the beginning so we could tell the story without interruption. We had come back from a day of shooting. We were shooting Highway. Jim was, of course, acting in it. Paul was running the camera. I was the assistant director. All the other tasks. Babe was doing the sound. One evening, it was the day that we filmed the dead coyote on the highway. We came back to the room and started to talk about the cop who was in the scene and the dead coyote, and then the conversation got into death, fear, what happens when children have that happen to them, and eventually Jim told the story.
Suddenly, the car slows and the child understands that a truck carrying Indian workers has overturned. He senses, more than knows, one or more of the workers are dying.
I think that Jim, when he was reciting that story that night, was impelled to tell the story because of the emotion that he was living through because of seeing this animal on the highway that we had filmed for Highway. And I think that emotion carried through for the rest of the day of filming and into the evening, and he unburdened that emotion by telling us the story of Dawn's Highway.
And it was early in the morning, and we were on our way to Los Alamos when this bus, it was a public transportation that was taking workers to Los Alamos, and the name of the bus line was the Bustos Bus Line. And I didn't expect this bus to pass me, but I was on my side. But since the road at that time wasn't that wide, he didn't have enough space. He caught me with the front part of the bus, which is a lot wider when the doors are, and it hit the truck in the back and turned me over.
And the truck went over the fence. He wasn't on the highway. Over the fence on the side of the road. I'd say maybe 25, 30 feet away from the highway. That's where the truck turned over and lost all the passengers that they had. And that's how they got hurt.
Jim Morrison sees human beings dying for the first time. He recalled, "It's my first reaction to death. And all of a sudden, these are redskins and they're just lying all over the fucking road, bleeding to death."
I heard a lot about my accident at the time, and some people said Indians, but there were no Indians. We are, in a sense, even though we're Hispanics, we have Indian blood, because when the Spaniards came to this country, they claimed, I don't know, that they raped the Indian women, and this is where they started getting the mixture of the Hispanics and Indian. So we've got Indian blood. So we might say that we were, in some sense, Indian related, but we would call ourselves Hispanics.
And so when they encounter this particular accident and they see individuals that look like people that they had probably seen in pueblos, it very much shaped how they saw them, who they thought they were, what communities they thought they were from.
Indian children maybe riding bareback on horses, certainly seeing carts and wagons along the side of the road, seeing acequias irrigating fields, seeing flat-roofed adobe houses. It would have been a real eye-opening experience of discovery for a young person like that.
A young Jim Morrison, I think, very much would have seen what his parents had sort of trained him to see in many ways. So the Morrisons, as a military family, were probably visiting several Indian pueblos at during different dance festivals, during different feast days, and they saw what they saw as Indians.
Identity is always situational. I consider myself sometimes Hispano, sometimes Chicano, sometimes I wonder who I am. I don't really know my genealogy that well. So identity, we sort of make it up as we go, particularly ethnic identity.
The contradictions of what it meant over hundreds of years for people to come together in various relations and to form new identities. And that's the moment of the 1940s. So someone peeking into that window would have seen what they thought was Indian, Spanish, Anglo, but it was really much more complex.
Now I have, it's been quite a few years, but at first I would feel the truck going around, and the back of my truck, I could hear the lumber and the shack that I had back there, and I was thinking of the people, how they would be taken out of there and who would get hurt and everything, and I didn't think I was going to make it myself.
They were still laying there when we got there. When we got there with me and Frankie, some were still laying there because they could only take so many in an ambulance. They had to make 2 or 3 trips. There were 5, 6, maybe 7 people there hurting.
It just, to me, it was real, it's what I would call horrible. But we survived, thanks to God.
His father and grandfather get out of the car, but he must stay with his mother and grandmother. He doesn't want to be restrained. He wants to help.
Basilio Quintana, 67, of San Pedro, met death on State Road number 30, State Police Captain A.B. Martinez said, when a truck driven by Tony Montoya, also of San Pedro, left the road at a dip and overturned.
But at the same time, he wants to shut his eyes. Morrison recalled, I didn't want to look back. I'm just this little, like a child, it's like a flower, man, and my head just floating in the breeze, man.
To see that accident, I mean, that many people involved at one time, it goes into your mind. I mean, you say, hey, feel sorry for the people. Because, like I say, and especially because I knew them all.
Who wouldn't have been profoundly affected? What had been certain becomes uncertain. He feels the fear in the adults around him. He realizes that they have no more power than he does. They cannot alter reality. They cannot affect what has happened. Morrison stated, all of a sudden I just realized that they didn't know what was happening any more than I did, man. That was the first time I tasted fear.
And I didn't know anything at that time yet that Mr. Basilio Quintana had been killed. I'm not even sure whether he died there or not. I guess I never thought about it, but maybe he died later on. And in fact, I think Mr. Quintana, the deceased one that was in the accident with me, I think it was his last day in work. He was going to retire.
Basilio and the family apparently, lived in Upper San Pedro in Española, New Mexico. He was a sheep herder for a long period of time. Basilio Quintana and Genoveva were both practicing Catholics and raised their children as Catholics. I recall talking to cousins who told me that was his it was Basilio's last day at work, and that's the day that he was killed.
Then there's something different, unlike anything else. Jim Morrison shared the memory. And this is like a projection from a long way back, but I do think that at that moment, the souls or the ghosts of those dead Indians, maybe one or two of them, just leaped into my soul, man. And they're still there.
He actually made us believe, or he shared with us his belief, that the souls of one or more of these dead or injured people, these workers, played some games with his head.
If Jim Morrison felt they were Indians to him, and that was what was important to him. He internalized that. If he felt that somehow that spirit was speaking to him, was in him, was part of him, then it's difficult to suggest that that's not so, I think.
When he saw this accident take place at the age of 3, he ended up thinking about the fact that the ghosts of those dead Indians, as he wrote about it, jumped into his body and really influenced not just his perception of himself in this world, but his very soul.
Having a profound experience of feeling that spirits will jump about as the result of something as remarkable and significant an experience of an automobile accident, and maybe within the context of the cross-cultural experience in which this was occurring, could have been especially profound.
People's perceptions, reality, perception, 9/10 reality. They may have well have been Indians, right? Because to him, that's what he saw. And it shaped his life.
I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but some people say that there are ghosts, and one of them could have come out of there, but I personally don't believe it. We Catholics are not supposed to believe that.
He connected the coyote on the highway that we had filmed that day with that brought that experience back to him. That panting, dying coyote brought the experience of those dead workers on the highway back to him in such a meaningful way that he remembered that story in really intricate detail and told it to us. But it wasn't necessarily about the coyote, which he used as a symbol or a metaphor. The story is about how death can stare you in the face and you can tremble right to your boots, whether you're a 3.5-year-old, his age, or adults like his parents and his grandparents.
The experience colors Jim Morrison's understanding of all that had come before and all that would come after, which he clearly expressed in these questions. Is death beautiful, or is it nowhere? That is what I want to know. I mean, is it where it's at, or is it not where it's at?